Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try, it's never enough for someone? That no matter how much you give of yourself, the person always finds something to criticize or make you feel small? If you're here, you've probably been through a situation like this. Maybe you felt guilt, confusion, or even questioned your own sanity. These feelings are more common than we think and often have a name: narcissistic abuse. It's like being trapped in a maze with no exit, where every attempt to escape only seems to take you back to the starting point. Narcissistic abuse involves emotional manipulation, psychological control, social isolation, and, in some cases, physical or spiritual abuse. Victims often lose themselves, struggle to trust again, and develop deep traumas that impact their lives in devastating ways. In this video, we'll dive into this complex topic to better understand how narcissistic abuse works, covering themes such as what narcissistic abuse is, the types of narcissists, their characteristics, behaviors, how the cycle of abuse works, the consequences of abuse on the victim's life, the origins of narcissism, strategies for liberation, and more. Hello, I'm Lauren Mitchell. My mission is to show you that you were never the problem. Stay with me until the end, because together we'll light up this dark path and turn your pain into strength. This is a heavy topic, but it's also a call to hope and awareness. The journey may be difficult, but every step taken toward freedom is worth it. Ready? Let's start by understanding what narcissistic abuse is. When we talk about narcissistic abuse, we're dealing with a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond difficult personality traits or complicated relationships. It's a deeply harmful dynamic sustained by emotional manipulation, psychological control, and the exploitation of others to feed insatiable egotistical needs. The term may sound technical, but its manifestation in victims' lives is visceral, painful, and often invisible to outsiders. The abuse isn't limited to yelling or obvious physical aggression. It happens between the lines, in calculated silences, in carefully chosen words meant to destabilize. People with strong narcissistic traits, or even narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, build relationships based on power and domination. They don't see others as complete human beings, but as extensions of themselves, mere instruments for validation or personal satisfaction. This type of abuse can occur in different areas of life. In the family environment, where children grow up under the weight of unrealistic expectations or parents who constantly invalidate their emotions. In romantic relationships, where a partner becomes trapped in a vicious cycle of idealization and destruction, or even in professional settings, where coworkers or bosses use intimidation and control tactics to maintain their position of superiority. It's important to note that not all egocentric or manipulative behavior constitutes narcissistic abuse. Many people may display narcissistic traits without it representing a disorder. However, when these traits are persistent and cause significant harm to others, we're dealing with something more serious. Narcissistic abuse doesn't just destroy relationships, it fragments the victim's identity, leaving deep scars that can take years to heal. The complexity of this topic lies precisely in this duality. On one hand, there's the attempt to understand the abuser's motivations, which often stem from unresolved trauma. On the other, there's the devastating impact on the victim, who faces a grueling process of emotional reconstruction. Understanding this dynamic is the first step in identifying warning signs before the damage becomes irreversible. When we look at these layers of narcissistic abuse, we realize it's not just about the abuser, but also about the system of control they create around themselves. It's a power game where the victim often feels powerless, confused, and unable to escape. The good news is that by better understanding how this mechanism works, we begin to see ways to disrupt it and bring light to what once seemed impossible to decipher. Now, who can be affected? Who is the narcissist's target audience? Narcissistic abuse doesn't pick its victims. It crosses genders, ages, social classes, and cultures, impacting anyone who crosses paths with someone with strong narcissistic traits. Men, women, children, and even professionals in corporate environments can become targets of this toxic dynamic. It's not a matter of weakness or strength. Anyone can be pulled into this emotional labyrinth before even noticing the warning signs. Children raised by narcissistic parents often grow up under the weight of unrealistic expectations or in an environment where their emotions are constantly invalidated. Adults in romantic relationships may find themselves caught in an initially charming cycle, only to later discover they're dealing with someone who manipulates and controls them. In the workplace, narcissistic co-workers or bosses may use intimidation and exploitation tactics to maintain their power position. The universality of the problem is what makes it even more concerning. Often, victims don't realize they're being abused because the abuser's behavior is subtle at first. Phrases like, "It's for your own good," or "You know I only want to help," mask manipulative intentions, leaving the victim confused and questioning their own perception of reality. This mechanism, known as gaslighting, is just one of many tools the abuser uses to maintain control. Additionally, the social isolation imposed by the narcissist makes victims feel even more vulnerable and alone. Friends and family may not understand the severity of the situation, especially when the abuser appears charismatic or kind in public. This duality makes it even harder for the victim to seek help or escape the cycle. Understanding who can be affected by narcissistic abuse is crucial to raising awareness about the issue. The more people recognize the signs, the greater the chance of interrupting this pattern before it causes irreparable damage. And by talking about it, we reinforce the idea that no one has to face this battle alone. Solidarity and support can be powerful tools to begin dismantling the abuser's control. A pertinent question is, what are the types of narcissists? What are their characteristics? And how do they behave? When discussing narcissistic abuse, it's essential to understand that not all narcissists behave the same way. There are different profiles, each with its own peculiarities, but they all converge on one point: the devastating impact they have on their victims. Recognizing these types can be the first step in identifying warning signs before the damage becomes irreversible. Let's explore the main narcissistic profiles and how they manifest in everyday life. The grandiose narcissist is perhaps the easiest to identify, at least at first glance. They don't hide who they are, or rather, who they want you to believe they are. This type of narcissist loves being the center of attention and makes a point of flaunting their supposed superiority. They invest time and energy in maintaining their physical appearance, showcasing achievements, and ensuring everyone around them knows how special they are. Living with someone like this can be exhausting, as their constant need for validation drains the energy of those nearby. At first, they may seem charismatic and engaging, but over time, their domineering attitude and lack of empathy become burdensome. On the other hand, we have the covert narcissist, known as the wolf in sheep's clothing. This profile is much more subtle and dangerous because they disguise their intentions under a facade of vulnerability and kindness. They may even appear sensitive and compassionate early on. But as the relationship progresses, their controlling side begins to emerge. The covert narcissist acts as if they need help or protection, creating a dynamic where the victim feels compelled to save them. This emotional trap is extremely effective because it leads the victim to invest more and more in the relationship, hoping to bring back the sweet person they initially met. By the time they realize this won't happen, they're already deeply trapped. The cerebral narcissist, meanwhile, positions themselves as intellectually superior. They interrupt conversations, belittle others' opinions, and act as if they alone hold the truth. To them, people around them are inferior, incapable of understanding the world as well as they do. This type of narcissist uses their supposed intelligence as a weapon, constantly invalidating others' perspectives and maintaining an air of condescension. Living with someone like this can be frustrating, as any attempt at dialogue is sabotaged by their need to always be right. Then, there's the communal narcissist, perhaps the hardest to detect, especially because they cultivate a flawless public image. They participate in charitable, religious, or community activities, projecting themselves as someone who's always helping others. However, this facade only serves to mask their abusive behaviors. When confronted, they use their positive reputation as a shield, ensuring no one will believe accusations against them. This type of narcissist knows how to manipulate their social environment perfectly, making it even harder for victims to seek outside help or support. We also have the malignant narcissist, whose behavior may include sadistic traits. While not all narcissists are malignant, This specific profile derives satisfaction from others' suffering. They may deliberately inflict emotional or psychological pain, feeding off the control they exert over their victim. This type of abuse is especially insidious because it creates a dynamic where the victim's pain becomes a tool to reinforce the abuser's power. Understanding these different types of narcissists is crucial for recognizing behavioral patterns that may indicate an abusive relationship. Each profile employs its own manipulation strategies, but the end result is always the same: the crushing of the victim's self-esteem and autonomy. By observing these characteristics, we begin to see that narcissistic abuse isn't just about personality traits, but about a complex dynamic of power and control that must be dismantled. Now that we better understand who these abusers are, we can move forward to examine how they operate within their cycles of abuse. After all, understanding the stages of this cycle is essential for identifying when and how to escape this toxic dynamic. The narcissistic abuse cycle is a complex, repetitive dynamic that keeps the victim trapped in an emotional web that's nearly impossible to escape without help or awareness. This cycle not only entraps, but also conditions the victim to believe the abuser's behavior is normal or even deserved. To better understand how this dynamic works, let's explore its key stages, each with specific characteristics and devastating impacts. The first phase is love bombing, an initial period of intense seduction and idealization. At this stage, the narcissist invests time and energy to win over their victim, making them feel special, loved, and valued. They constantly praise, gift, and shower the victim with exaggerated attention, creating a false sense of deep connection. This phase is deliberately designed to gain the victim's trust and lay the groundwork for future control. At first, everything seems perfect, almost too good to be true, and in fact, it is. Once the victim is emotionally invested, the second phase begins: devaluation. Here, the narcissist reveals their true self. Praise gives way to constant criticism, social isolation, and emotional manipulation. The victim is treated with indifference or hostility, and any attempt to question the abuser's behavior is quickly invalidated. Tactics like gaslighting, where the narcissist makes the victim doubt their own reality, become common. By this point, the victim is deeply entrenched in the relationship, often feeling guilty for any problems that arise and believing it's their responsibility to fix them. The third phase is discard, when the narcissist decides the victim no longer serves their interests. This may happen because they've found another source of validation, or simply because the victim has become useless to their purposes. The discard is often cruel and abrupt, leaving the victim completely disoriented and emotionally shattered. In some cases, the narcissist further smears the victim, spreading lies about them to justify their abandonment and maintain their pristine public image. But the cycle doesn't end there. After the discard comes the hoovering phase, where the abuser attempts to lure the victim back into the relationship. They use emotional tactics like promises of change, declarations of love, or even guilt-tripping to rekindle the bond. This phase is especially insidious because it preys on the victim's emotional vulnerability. They may be weakened and still clinging to hope of reclaiming the person they initially fell for. Beyond these main phases, other mechanisms sustain the cycle. For example, social isolation is a strategy the narcissist uses to sever the victim's ties with friends, family, and other support networks. Without these connections, it becomes even harder for the victim to recognize the reality of the situation or seek help. Another tactic is triangulation, where the abuser introduces a third party, an ex, a new romantic interest, or even a friend, to create jealousy and insecurity in the victim. Gaslighting is also a powerful tool in this cycle. By making the victim doubt their memory, perception, or sanity, the narcissist ensures they remain under control. Phrases like "that never happened" or "you're overreacting" are classic examples of this technique. Over time, the victim internalizes these messages, blames themselves, and loses confidence in their own judgment. Behind these stages lies a clear objective: maintaining emotional and psychological dominance over the victim. Each phase is carefully designed to reinforce emotional dependency, crush self-esteem, and ensure the victim stays trapped. It's important to remember this pattern doesn't happen just once. It repeats continuously, intensifying the trauma with each full cycle. By understanding these mechanisms, we begin to see that the abuse cycle isn't just about the abuser's behavior, but also how it profoundly impacts the victim's life. The consequences can range from severe mental health disorders to persistent physical issues, highlighting the urgency of breaking this dynamic before it causes irreversible damage. Now, it's crucial to understand the consequences of narcissistic abuse on the victim's life. Enduring a narcissistic abuse cycle doesn't just leave emotional scars. It triggers a cascade of consequences that deeply affect every aspect of the victim's life. These wounds can be so severe that they often take years, even decades, to heal. When we talk about the impact of this abuse, we're dealing with something far beyond temporary sadness or frustration. We're talking about complex trauma that infiltrates a person's identity, relationships, and even physical health. One of the first visible consequences is guilt. Victims often internalize the abuser's criticisms and manipulations, believing they're responsible for the relationship's problems. This emotional burden can spiral into rumination, where the person obsessively replays thoughts about what they could have done differently. This self-criticism feeds a mental loop that makes it harder to escape the toxic pattern. Another devastating effect is the risk of developing depression and anxiety disorders. The constant emotional invalidation, social isolation, and psychological control imposed by the narcissist can lead to deep hopelessness and fear. Many victims report intrusive thoughts and persistent insecurity even after the relationship ends. In severe cases, these symptoms can evolve into PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, especially when gaslighting, public humiliation, or physical abuse were involved. Narcissistic abuse also directly damages the victim's ability to trust themselves and others. The relentless manipulation and gaslighting make them question their own perceptions and decisions. This can result in indecisiveness, insomnia, and even physical issues like eating disorders, chronic pain, or psychosomatic illnesses. The mind-body connection is so strong that emotional trauma often manifests physically, compounding the suffering. Social isolation is another major consequence. Narcissists systematically isolate their victims from friends, family, and support networks, whether through direct or indirect manipulation. Over time, victims may withdraw from these vital connections, believing no one else will understand or support them. This isolation not only deepens loneliness, but also makes it harder to seek help or escape the abuse. Even after leaving, many victims struggle to form new relationships as trauma leaves them wary of closeness. Perhaps one of the most corrosive effects is the erosion of self-esteem. Narcissists constantly devalue their victims, reinforcing that they're not good enough, smart enough, or capable enough. This repeated messaging creates a deep sense of inadequacy, leaving victims unable to recognize their own worth. Rebuilding self-esteem after this level of emotional destruction requires intensive work, often with professional help. There are also practical consequences that can't be ignored. Many victims face financial struggles due to economic manipulation, such as control over resources, theft, or sabotage of work opportunities. In some cases, spiritual abuse can trigger a crisis of faith or personal values, leaving victims even more lost and disconnected from themselves. It's important to emphasize that while these consequences feel overwhelming, they aren't permanent. With time, proper support, and the right tools, healing is possible. However, the first step is acknowledging the severity of the abuse's impact. Recognizing these wounds not as personal failures, but as direct results of the abuser's actions, is crucial for beginning the journey toward recovery. When we examine these consequences, it becomes clear that narcissistic abuse isn't just toxic behavior. It's a destructive force that alters the victim's entire life trajectory. That's why discussing ways to break this dynamic is essential before it causes irreversible harm. Now let's understand the origins of narcissism. To better comprehend narcissistic abuse, it's essential to examine the roots of this behavior and try to understand what leads someone to develop such harmful traits. While this doesn't justify their actions, exploring these origins helps us deconstruct the power and control dynamic they impose on their victims. One of the most widely accepted theories about the origin of narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, is linked to deep childhood trauma. Many narcissists grew up in environments where they suffered physical or emotional abuse or extreme neglect. These traumas may have been caused by overly critical, overprotective, or completely absent parents. To psychologically survive this painful reality, the child creates a false self, an idealized version of themselves that serves as a shield against suffering. This false self is built to protect inner fragility, but over time, it becomes a prison that prevents genuine connection with others. Another possible explanation involves genetic factors combined with environmental influences. Some people may have a biological predisposition to develop narcissistic traits, but it's life events, especially during childhood, that shape these characteristics into something toxic. For example, children raised in families where love and attention are conditional on academic, athletic, or social performance may internalize the idea that they're only valuable if they constantly impress others. This competitive, validation-seeking mindset can evolve into narcissistic behaviors in adulthood. However, it's important to note that not everyone who experiences trauma or dysfunctional environments becomes a narcissist. The difference lies in how each individual processes their experiences and handles their emotions. Narcissists, in particular, choose to suppress their vulnerabilities and project an image of superiority and control, even if it's just an illusion. This fragile identity construction directly impacts how narcissists interact with the world. They constantly seek external validation, called narcissistic supply, to sustain their inflated ego. This insatiable need for admiration and recognition leads them to exploit, manipulate, and hurt those around them. Human relationships cease to be genuine connections and instead become utilitarian transactions, where others exist solely to serve their egotistical purposes. By understanding these origins, we begin to see the abuser not as an invincible figure, but as someone deeply insecure and trapped in their own emotional prison. This doesn't absolve them of responsibility or minimize the harm they cause. On the contrary, this perspective empowers victims, as it clarifies that the problem lies not with them, but with the abuser's unresolved wounds. This understanding also expands our capacity for empathy, not for the abuser, but for the scars they carry. However, it's crucial to remember that the victim's role is never to heal those wounds. The first step in breaking this dynamic is recognizing that the abuse is not your fault and that you deserve to be free from it. Now that we better understand the motivations behind narcissistic behavior, we can move forward to identify the clear signs that reveal their presence in our lives. Recognizing these red flags is essential to stopping the cycle before it causes irreversible damage. Identifying a narcissist isn't always straightforward, especially since many are masters at masking their intentions in the early stages of a relationship. However, there are clear signs that can help uncover their true behavior behind the charming facade. Understanding these indicators gives you valuable tools to protect yourself before the emotional damage becomes irreversible. One of the first signs is love bombing, an intense seduction phase where the abuser showers you with excessive attention, gifts, flattery, and grand promises. While it may seem romantic or empathetic at first, this avalanche of affection has a clear purpose: to create rapid emotional dependency. If someone is constantly trying to impress you or make you feel like the most special person in the world in an unusually short time, this is a red flag. Healthy relationships build gradually on mutual trust and respect, not exaggerated idealizations. Another hallmark trait is the use of manipulative phrases that destabilize you emotionally. Tactics like gaslighting are common and involve statements like, "You're overreacting," "That never happened," "You're going crazy." These declarations are designed to make you doubt your own memory, perception, and sanity. Over time, this creates mental disorientation, leaving you completely dependent on the abuser's version of reality. The silent treatment is another powerful weapon in the narcissist's arsenal. Instead of resolving conflicts healthily, they ignore you completely, creating anxiety and guilt. This behavior is meant to punish and control, reinforcing the idea that you must submit to regain their attention. Narcissists also frequently use triangulation, bringing third parties into the relationship to create jealousy or competition. They may mention ex-partners, close friends, or even fictional figures to make you feel insecure. This dynamic not only weakens self-esteem, but further isolates you, making you believe you're not enough to hold the abuser's interest. Emotionally invalidating phrases are also common. A narcissist might say, "You're being dramatic. No one will believe you." These statements minimize your feelings while reinforcing the narrative that you're irrational or untrustworthy. When confronted about their behavior, they rarely take accountability, preferring to blame others or justify themselves with plausible excuses. Another critical sign is financial control. Many narcissists use money as a way to keep victims trapped, whether by restricting access to resources, sabotaging job opportunities, or demanding detailed accounts of every penny spent. This type of control not only weakens you financially, but also strips away your autonomy to escape. By recognizing these patterns early, you can protect yourself from deeper entanglement in the narcissist's web. Awareness is the first step toward reclaiming your power and breaking free from their toxic influence. Also, observe how the person treats those around them. A narcissist tends to be extremely critical, competitive, or condescending in their interactions. They may constantly interrupt, belittle others' opinions, or even publicly humiliate those they consider inferior. These behaviors reveal the absence of empathy, a hallmark of narcissistic abuse. Recognizing these signs is the first step to breaking the cycle of abuse. The sooner you identify these traits, the better equipped you'll be to make conscious decisions and seek support before the emotional damage worsens. Remember, the abuser will always seek ways to control and manipulate, but the power to stop this dynamic lies in the victim's hands the moment they choose to see reality. Now that we know how to identify a narcissist, let's explore practical strategies to help victims escape this complex emotional maze. Every step toward freedom is a move toward rebuilding life and self-worth. Breaking free from a narcissistic abuse cycle is undoubtedly one of the most challenging journeys one can face. However, with the right tools and proper support, liberation is not only possible, it can be transformative. Let's examine practical strategies to help victims sever the emotional, psychological, and even physical ties binding them to their abuser. Each step in this process is a move toward reclaiming life and self-esteem. The first and most crucial strategy is no contact. This means cutting off all communication with the abuser, whether through messages, social media, or intermediaries. No contact is essential because narcissistic abusers use any interaction, no matter how brief, to reassert emotional control. Even when they appear remorseful or promise change, remember these are manipulative tactics to maintain the bond. Setting clear, firm boundaries is key to breaking the cycle. To successfully implement no contact, practical steps may be necessary: blocking phone numbers, deleting shared social media accounts, and avoiding places where accidental encounters might occur. In more complex cases, such as when children or financial ties are involved, legal intervention may be required to establish formal protections. Despite initial challenges, no contact allows victims to begin emotionally detaching and focus on their recovery. Seeking professional support is also indispensable. Individual therapy, support groups, and trauma-informed counseling can help process the abuse, rebuild self-esteem, and develop healthy coping mechanisms. A therapist specializing in emotional abuse and complex trauma can guide victims in identifying harmful patterns, challenging the abuser's distorted narratives, and, most importantly, restoring self-trust. Another vital strategy is reconnecting with meaningful relationships. Narcissists often isolate victims from friends, family, and support networks. Rebuilding these connections can be daunting, but is critical for regaining strength. Start small, call a close friend, meet a relative for coffee, or join low-pressure social activities. Confiding in trusted people fosters solidarity and creates a safety net for difficult moments. Self-care plays a central role in healing. Many victims neglect basic needs during abusive relationships due to lack of time, energy, or the abuser's restrictions. As you reclaim your life, prioritize physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Exercise, balanced nutrition, proper sleep, and revisiting abandoned hobbies are powerful ways to rediscover your identity beyond abuse. Rediscovering joy in simple pleasures, reading, movies, or walks outdoors may seem trivial at first, but these small victories build resilience over time. Practices like meditation, yoga, or journaling can also help manage intrusive thoughts and anxiety, fostering clarity and emotional balance. Finally, remember that leaving abuse doesn't mean solving everything overnight. Recovery is gradual, with good days and setbacks. Accepting that healing isn't linear and celebrating every tiny victory fuels motivation and resilience. By adopting these strategies, victims begin envisioning a new reality, a life free from the abuser's control. Though the path is hard, it leads to freedom, authenticity, and renewal. Each step out of this emotional maze is a step toward living fully, without fear or subjugation. Reaching the end of this journey may feel overwhelming, especially with such a heavy, nuanced topic. But remember, however difficult it is to face narcissistic abuse, healing and liberation are possible for those willing to take the first steps. The process won't be easy, but every effort is worth reclaiming your life. Throughout this discussion, we've explored abuse mechanisms, from its origins to its devastating impacts. We've examined the abuse cycle, abuser profiles, warning signs, and practical escape strategies. This knowledge offers clarity, awareness, and above all, hope. Leaving abuse doesn't mean instant solutions. Recovery has ups and downs. Doubt, guilt, and fear are part of the journey. Acknowledging that you deserve freedom is already a monumental step. Celebrate small wins. They build strength to keep moving forward. You're not alone in this fight. Support networks, therapists, and online communities are ready to listen and help. Sharing your story with others can foster solidarity and encouragement. Hearing from survivors who've broken free often brings comfort and motivation to keep fighting. Narcissistic abuse leaves deep scars, but it doesn't define you. You are more than your pain. Through self-care, rediscovered passions, and rebuilt connections, you'll glimpse a new version of yourself, authentic, free, and whole. This process takes time, but each step out of the maze makes the light ahead brighter. When you finally break the cycle, you'll see that life beyond it isn't just possible. It can be extraordinarily beautiful. Your learning doesn't have to end here. The next video was chosen especially for you. Enjoy. Remember, you are light. Never forget to shine.